check it out. We are doing some maintenance on the car today. I'm doing some spark plugs and some oil, and I got some requests on the video for spark plugs, so we're going to go over spark plugs, why you run certain spark plugs and what they do. So I run a copper core NGK. I picked NGK just because I know they work well in these cars, and it was between this and a couple other different options, but I chose the NGKs. Important thing is that it's 2 steps colder than stock, and it's a copper core plug. 2 steps colder than stock. Why do you need to do that, and what is that? To run a colder plug means that it dissipates the heat faster. It can get rid of the heat faster that generates inside the plug from being connected to the top of the head. That being the case, when you're running a lot of boost or nitrous or whatever you're doing, you're creating a ton of energy and a ton of heat, and it collects in here and you have to get rid of it. If you can't get rid of it fast enough, the spark plug starts to overheat and it'll either fail, or you might actually end up with pre-detonation issues where the spark plug is this glowing, basically turns into a glow plug and is igniting fuel earlier than it's supposed to, which is a very dangerous situation. And then the opposite of that is running a plug that's too cold, right? So now it can't get rid of, or it gets rid of heat too quickly. So when you're idling for a long time, it can't burn the carbon off because it's not running hot enough. And then you end up with a fouled plug. So that can also be an issue. Long story short, if you're running stock, you're fine with whatever. If you put some boost to it, definitely go a step colder. If you put moderate boost or nitrous to it, I would go 2 steps colder. And you know, that's an important piece to understand. So now, why do I run a copper core plug versus what would be like your silver or iridium or platinum plug? Copper core plugs, if you look at the end of the electrode, it's quite a large tip on it. You know, it looks like a really dull pencil basically, versus this, which is a really sharp point. These plugs work really good, and the reason they use these versus copper plugs is because copper plugs fail so quickly. Copper plugs go bad in about 10,000 miles. Your other plugs will go, you know, 50 to 100, whatever. You know, they go a lot longer. But the issue with them is that little tip is so sharp and so small that when you're running a lot of boost and everything else, that actually becomes a little hot spot, and that can start to glow. And if it gets too hot, you'll start with that same issue of igniting fuel before you want to. So that's why I don't really like to run these. It's not a problem. You can absolutely run these, and you can have a car that kicks ass and does everything it's supposed to do with a silver plug or whatever you want. Brisk Racing has a silver plug that's really good. But it is a fact that copper core plugs have the highest resistance to detonation, and that is what I'm going for. That's the selling point on the copper plugs. Plus, if I'm replacing them every 7,000 miles, I always have fresh plugs in my car, and these are $10 a piece, whereas these are like $2.50. So I can replace my plugs a lot more often and still be saving money. All right, now with that being said, we have the next situation, which is your spark plug gap and what is called spark blowout. Spark blowout is a situation where you're running so much boost. Let's back up a little bit. You've got your coil, right? We're gonna make this our coil. Our coil is only so big, and the coil holds energy from the computer, right? Or from, you know, its power source, and it just holds energy. It's inside of the coil, and then the computer tells it, bing, light, and it sends all that energy that is generated and being saved in the coil through the spark plug, and it jumps through what's called your air gap. So spark plugs are insulated all through here. So this is where your spark plug wire hooks up, and this is insulation. The electricity cannot get through here. That's why if you crack the porcelain, it actually can jump through the porcelain into the head, and your spark will never hit this part of the spark plug. What you need to do is have it so insulated that the spark or the electronic current is forced down to the bottom, and then in order to reach ground, which is the body, it has to jump that air gap to that little prong. That prong is your ground. When it jumps that air gap, it's all filled with you know, air and fuel, and that air gap lights up a little bit of air and fuel, and then your mixture propagates through the combustion chamber. The timing of that and how that happens is super important, and let me stress to you how important that is. When you're tuning a car, you're talking about the difference between 15 degrees of timing and 18 degrees of timing, right? You could make 40 horsepower between 18 degrees of timing and 24 degrees of timing. So think about that. You could end up pre-det, have over ignition issues if you go from 15 degrees of timing to 18 degrees of timing. That is 3 degrees of crankshaft rotation. 3 degrees at 6,000 RPMs. Imagine how short that window of time is. 3 degrees of a 360 degree rotation at 6,000 RPMs. That literally happens in the smallest of milliseconds. So what really matters is how your spark plugs are set up. If you have a spark plug that has a large gap like this, it lights a lot of fuel and air at one time because it jumps through so much of it, right? So when it hops through all that fuel and air and it lights it all at the same time, your flame front actually is faster than what it would be with this plug. And it's a little more aggressive. So you actually run a little bit less timing, which is cool. And then when you have this plug, well, why would you shorten it down if this is actually giving you a better flame front? The reason you shorten it down is because when you start adding a bunch of boost, it'll actually blow the spark out. So what happens is the spark comes down, it hits, and it starts the flame front. Well, the pressures and everything inside the combustion chamber are so aggressive that it actually blows it out like a candle, and you can't get it. So it'll happen when you're accelerating in the car, it starts to get into boost, and all of a sudden you just, like, the car starts breaking up real bad. That's what happens when you have too much gap. So you have to tighten that gap up. What happens when you tighten the gap up so much that you're basically out of fucking spark and you're left with, you know, you can't do anything? Well, then you have to upgrade your coils. So that's when you see people have those big coils on a car. You know, they basically were dealing with spark blowout issues until it got to the point where it's like, all right, we have to upgrade our coils. Coils, like MSD coils and things like that, if it's the same size as this, hot tip, it's not giving you any more energy, because a coil is very simple. It's just it's exactly what it says. It's a coil of wire through it, and it can only hold so much energy based on its size. So that's why you see those modular guys with the coils, like LS coils sitting on top of the valve covers. It's a bigger coil per spark plug. So what I'm dealing with right now, and one of the reasons I'm changing, is it's about time, and two, once I put that 10% overdrive pulley on, I started having an issue with when I would break 6,000 RPMs, the car would just break up a little bit, and I'm very sure it's going to be spark blowout. So what I'm going to do is take my spark plug that I'm running, I'm going to measure it. I'm pretty sure it's 0.032 inches on the gap, and I'm going to drop it down to about 0.026. And then I'll see if it revs out, and if the car revs all the way out, then I am good to go. If it doesn't, then I got some more things to figure out. But that is essentially what you're looking at when you do spark plugs. And then the other thing that I was going to say is the location of that electrode. So notice where this one sits, it's a little bit further into the combustion chamber. That other spark plug I was looking at, that was a copper core Autolite, sat into the combustion chamber more like this. And that's going to be an issue because now the flame front is starting more towards the piston versus where it was. So that can actually change our ignition timing as well. So I would hate to put in a new plug that's a cheap plug and end up with tune issues because of it. So long story short, whatever setup you do in the car before you get it tuned, make sure it's the right stuff, and then get it tuned on that, and they'll dial it in, and then don't change it from there. If the tune is solid, just don't make any changes. Just keep your stuff where it's supposed to be. And if you do change it, you might want to think about getting a retune. And to people that think, oh, you can just change this and change that, and you don't need a tune, you don't need a tune because you're actually not feeling what the difference is. Whereas if you do tune it, it's going to be advantageous for you. Tunes are incredibly important. This is actually the whole reason I learned to tune, was because I got tired of basically, you know, paying other people every time I had to make a change on the car. And I was like, man, I want to make changes on my car all the time. I'm gonna have to tune it all the time. I need to learn how to tune. So that's what pushed it that way. And there you go. So that's some spark plug information for you. I hope you enjoyed it. And pretty soon we'll knock out some more stuff and have some more fun. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching.